Hello, my name is Professor Shiladitya Rakshit. Group rights, learning outcome. Students introduced all the group rights with the explanation as to why they are called group rights. Towards the end of the discussion, students will be able to identify which of the following right is a group right from amongst the various rights given. Introduction. We have seen in the third and fourth chapters as to which are the first generation and second generation's rights respectively. We found their characteristics. Amongst the various characteristics, what is found is that those civil and political rights and socio-economic rights differ in many respects. They are both individualistic in nature. Those rights are enjoyed every person, though sometimes they are given to a class as such. But there are certain rights which can be enjoyed by many together. Those rights cannot be bifurcated to any particular person. These rights are called the group rights. Group rights are also called third generation rights. In fact, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights is given the right to deal with two types of rights called the human rights and the people's rights. The people rights are nothing but group rights as the name indicates. The International Human Rights Document uses the word people's right to indicate group rights. Let us now see in the ICCPR and the African Charter to find out which these rights are. Detailed discussion on these rights will be done in respective chapters. The purpose of this chapter is to just introduce these rights with their sources. The concept of group rights. A right is a group right only if it is borne by the group in qua group. If the individuals who form a group hold rights as separate individuals, their several individual rights do not add up to a group right. For example, Scientologists constitute a group whose members might be said to have a right to conduct their lives according to their beliefs, provided that in doing so, they do not violate the rights of others. And saying does not ascribe a group right to Scientologists. Rather, we may be saying only that individuals, include Scientologists, have the right to conduct their lives as they choose. Thus, the relevant right is one held by each individual Scientologist rather than by Scientologists as a collectivity. In the same way, a right may have a content that relates to a collectivity without its being a group right. An individual can have a right to join a group, such as a trade union, only if there is a group for him to join. Having joined the group, that individual may have the rights that he possesses only as a member of the group. In both instances, however, these typically will be rights held in an individual capacity rather than rights that belong to the group. If someone prevents another person from joining the group or prevents an individual from exercising his right as a member of the group, the right he violates are typically the individual's rights rather than the group's rights. Then we can hold that if someone prevents individuals from joining a group such as a trade union, such action violates not only rights held by that would be joiners, but also a right held by the trade union as a group. In that case, a genuine group right would be at stake. Simply put, not every right that is associated with group membership or group activity need to be a group right. What distinguishes a right as a group right is subject rather than its object, who it holds the right rather than what the right is a right to. Peter Jones, A Human Rights, Group Rights and People's Rights, 1999. Now, there are types of group rights. Rights to self-determination. It is interesting to note that the ICCPR and the ICCSR have a common article which talks about the same right. This either qualifies to be both civil and political right and socio-economic and cultural right, or does not fall within the category of either. This right is called the right to self-determination. The article goes thus: all peoples have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social and cultural development. All peoples may, for their own ends, freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic cooperation based upon the principle of mutual benefit and international law. In no case may a people be deprived of its own means of subsistence. The state parties to the present covenant, including those having responsibility for the administration of non-self-governing and trust territories, shall promote the realization of the right of self-determination and shall respect that right, in conformity with the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations. Almost similar wordings are used in African Charter. Thus, Article 20, all peoples shall have the right to existence. They shall have the unquestionable and inalienable right to self-determination. They shall freely determine their political status and shall pursue their economic and social development according to the policy they have freely chosen. Colonized or oppressed peoples shall have the right to free themselves from the bonds of domination by resorting to any means recognized by the international community. All peoples shall have the right to the assistance of the state parties to the present Charter in their liberation struggle against foreign domination, be it political, economic or cultural. This right, as the word indicates, talk about the right of the people of the country to have the right to be independent from any other domination. This talks about nations' right. In fact, it cannot be attributed to any particular individual. It is people's right to be an independent nation. Each individual will be a beneficiary of it, but no single individual can claim it. For example, while India was a colony of Britain, we the people did not have the right to determine our own laws, policies or rulers. Things were imposed on us. Now every Indian was affected by it. No single individual can be pointed out as affected. If a remedy is to be given, that could be also be given to the entire people and not to a particular person. Freedom from the British was not an individual concern. It was the concern of India. This is called group rights. Everyone has a share in it, but not a definite share. Every inch is owned by all. This makes group right what it is. People's right over natural resources. African Charter, Article 21. All people shall freely dispose of their wealth and natural resources. This right shall be exercised in the exclusive interest of the people. In no case shall a people be deprived of it. In case of spoliation, the dispossessed people shall have the right to the lawful recovery of the property as well as to adequate compensation. The free disposal of wealth and natural resources shall be exercised without prejudice to the obligation of promoting international economic cooperation based on mutual respect, equitable exchange, and the principles of international law. State parties to the present Charter shall individually and collectively exercise the right to free disposal of their wealth and natural resources with a view to strengthening African unity and solidarity. This right is the right of the native people of a country against any foreign invasion and the right over the natural resources. This wealth and natural resources obviously can be owned by a people and not by individuals. For example, the water in the river which belongs to a nation is owned by all. But no single individual can claim a right over a particular portion of it. Group rights are thus related to being public. Right to development. All peoples shall have the right to their economic, social and cultural development, with due regard to their freedom and identity and in the equal enjoyment of the common heritage of mankind. States shall have the duty, individually or collectively, to ensure the exercise of the right to development, African Charter, Article 22. The Declaration on the Right to Development at the same time describes this right thus: the right to development is an inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all people are entitled to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political development in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. The human right to development also implies the full realization of the right of people to self-determination, which includes, subject to the relevant provisions of both international covenants on human rights, the exercise of the inalienable right to full sovereignty over all their natural wealth and resources, Article 1. The working in the Declaration as well as African Charter comprises of individuals as well as group rights to development. Thus, the right to development aims at individuals' development as well as group development. In the collective sense, it is the right of a nation to become a developed country. Thus, the right has an international connotation. Now, right to international peace and security. The African Charter gives this right the shape thus: all people shall have the right to national and international peace and security. The principles of solidarity and friend relations, implicitly affirmed by the Charter of the United Nations and reaffirmed by that of the Organization of African Unity, shall govern relations between states. For the purpose of strengthening peace, solidarity, and friend relations, state parties to the present Charter shall ensure that any individual enjoying the right of an asylum under Article 12 of the present Charter shall not engage in subversive activities against his country of origin or any other state party to the present Charter. B. Their territories shall not be used as bases for subservice or terrorist activities against the people or any other party to the present Charter. The right to peace is also obviously a right which everyone requires but cannot be given to a particular person. It is enjoyed by the people as a group. It is the requirement of nations against other nations for a propaganda against war and other disruptive activities like terrorism. It is obviously got the requirement of a particular person or persons in a country, but it is a requirement of a nation. This character makes the right a group right. Right to development has more significance in the globalization era because the WTO agreements can tend to widen the gap between the developed countries and the developing countries, which run counter to right to development. Detailed discussions are there in the respective chapter. A right to environment. All people shall have the right to a general satisfactory environment favorable to their development. African Charter, Article 24. From these wordings, it is not clear as to whether clean and healthy environment is covered here. But reading the wording of the principle of Stockholm Declaration together with these wordings give the impression that favorable environment conducive for the enjoyment of rights includes the clean and healthy environment too. Principle 1 says, man has the fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of a quality that permits a life of dignity and well-being, and he bears a solemn responsibility to protect and improve it, the environment, for present and future generations. In this respect, policies promoting or perpetuating apartheid racial segregation, discrimination, colonial and other forms of oppression and foreign domination stand condemned and must be eliminated. The language of the Declaration gives the right an individualistic touch, whereas the language of the African Charter gives it a collective touch. Thus, reading together, let us assume that the word environment used in the African Charter is fit use as natural environment and thus is a collective right too. Both to have a clean and healthy environment is a group right in a sense and an individual right in another sense. If a neighbor burns a toxic substance in his premise, then A is individually affected. Any solution will have an individual remedy. But environmental degradation like air pollution, water pollution, ozone layer depletion, etc. are taken. It affects the entire beings and the solution. It is also not for a particular person. Every being, including a human being, own the environment together without a determinate share to be pointed out. Thus, this right qualifies to be a group right. Rights of local and indigenous people. The indigenous people have certain rights like their right to own the natural resource as their property, to maintain their cultures, etc. These are the rights collectively owned by them. The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People give them certain rights like this. Now, indigenous peoples and individuals have the right to belong to an indigenous community or nation in accordance with the traditions and customs of the community or nation concerned. No discrimination of any kind may arise from the exercise of such a right. Indigenous peoples shall not be forcibly removed from their lands or territories. No relocation shall take place without the free, prior informed consent of the indigenous people concerned and after agreement on just and fair compensation and where possible with the option of return. Indigenous people have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect and develop the past, present and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies and visual and performing arts and literature. These words make it clear that indigenous people as a groups alone can maintain these rights. No particular person can claim any of these rights as a human being, but only as a member of that particular group. Rights of tribes. Almost similar as that of indigenous people, right is the case of the rights of tribes. Though the international law does not make such distinction between the tribes, the indigenous people and the aboriginals, they are distinct groups with similar rights. While the indigenous people are people who lived in a country before foreign invasion, aborigines are those who have different ways of living rest of the people. Tribes could be categorized as a kind of aborigines, though these is not much of a distinction made in the right given in international law. There are distinct rights given to the tribes in the national legislations in countries like India. These rights include the right of the tribes to live the style of life, right against atrocities, right to special protection, etc. But amongst these rights, all cannot be said to be group rights because these are rights which could be individualistic in nature, like right against atrocities. Right to reservation is also individualistic in nature, but allowing the tribes to continue with their culture as given the 5th schedule and the 7th schedule of the Constitution of India from part of group rights. Minority rights. As in the case of tribes, minority rights, whether a sexual minority, cultural minority, religious minority or linguistic minority, also have group rights as well as individualistic rights. Rights of minority to establish and administer education institution of their choice is an individualistic right, as a single person can be a beneficiary of this right. At the same time, the right of the culture or linguistic minority to conserve the same is a group right. Farmers' rights. Farmers' rights also has two distinct features, that of individualistic and that of collectivity. While the right of the farmer to life, right to sow and use the seeds, etc., are individually exercised, the farmer's property, right over the varieties they conserved, preserved, or developed remain as a group right. Because ever identifying a person who preserved a particular plant variety is impossible. It is a collective effort. Every farmer owns every inch of the intellectual aspect or the effort or a part of the plant. Rights of tradition knowledge holders. Every tradition knowledge is developed over a period of time. Who developed it or who conserved it are questions to which there is no answer. Everyone has a share in it if the law rewards them, but who can have how much cannot be decided. So this right also falls within the category of group rights. Conclusion. The rights which cannot be held by any particular person individually and only by a group are called group rights. They can be civil as well as political right or socio-economic and cultural rights. The problem with these rights are that as the owner of the right cannot be identified, it is very, very difficult to implement them, the rights as such. Thank you.